A horse left to die on the tracks crosses paths with a lonely millionaire. What starts as a rescue turns into the key to a decades-old secret. The rain lashed against the farmhouse windows with an intensity that Michael Reynolds had not witnessed since moving to Pine Valley. The metallic sound of droplets against the zinc roof blended with the distant rumble of mountain winds, creating a melancholy symphony that echoed through the empty house. At 52, Michael felt like a stranger in his own life. Sitting in his makeshift office, he observed the distant city lights twinkling between the trees through the foggy window. 6 months earlier, he had been in Chicago leading meetings, signing million-dollar contracts and living under the constant pressure of the corporate world. Now, surrounded by mountains and humid forests, he questioned whether his decision to retire early had been sensible or merely a cowardly escape. 40. Years building a career for what? He muttered, absent-mindedly shuffling papers scattered across the rustic wooden desk. Farm accounts, renovation budgets, catalogues of agricultural equipment. Everything seemed artificial compared to the complexity of the businesses he used to manage. The storm intensified, and Michael decided to make some coffee. As he walked through the kitchen, his thoughts returned to his last years in Chicago. The divorce had been finalized a year ago, after Sarah made it clear she wasn't willing to share her life with someone married to their work. His children, now adults, maintained sporadic contact, always polite but distant. The loneliness that was previously masked by his packed schedule now manifested with brutal clarity. A strange sound cut through his reflections. It wasn't the familiar noise of rain or wind. It was something metallic, intermittent, almost like a lament. Michael stopped stirring his coffee and listened carefully. The sound persisted, coming from the direction of the abandoned train tracks that crossed his property. Must be branches hitting the fence, he tried to convince himself. But something inside troubled him. The sound had a pattern, an almost desperate cadence that didn't match natural elements swaying in the wind. He put on his rain jacket and grabbed the most powerful flashlight he could find. The door opened with difficulty against the force of the wind, and Michael was greeted by a wall of water that immediately soaked his boots. Mud was already forming in the yard, and the path to the tracks would be more difficult than he had imagined. Each step was a struggle against the mud that stuck to his soles, but the metallic sound continued calling him. As he approached the tracks, a new noise joined the lament, the distant buzz of an approaching train. Michael felt his heart accelerate. The line had been deactivated years before, but he knew that some freight trains still occasionally used the route. The flashlight finally illuminated the scene that would change his life forever. A magnificent horse of noble bearing and dark coat almost invisible in the darkness had one of its hind legs trapped between the rails. The animal whinnied in desperation, its eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam with an intensity that conveyed both fear and plea. "My God," Michael murmured, feeling the visual impact of the situation. The horse was soaked, covered in mud, but even so it was possible to perceive its noble lineage. The scars scattered across its body told stories that Michael couldn't yet interpret. The train's buzz intensified. There was no time to seek help or proper tools. Michael ran to the animal, speaking in a soft tone to calm it, while assessing the situation with growing desperation. The leg was firmly trapped between two rails, but it didn't appear to be fractured. "Easy. Boy, we're going to get you out of there," he said, placing his hands on the horse's flank. The animal trembled initially, but something in Michael's voice seemed to reassure it. Michael observed that the space between the rails had been filled with stones almost intentionally, creating a perfect trap. With his bare hands, he began removing the stones one by one, fighting against time and the slippery mud. The horse remained surprisingly calm, as if understanding that this unknown man was its only hope. The train's headlight was already visible in the distance, cutting through the rain like a luminous blade. "Come on, just a little more," Michael murmured, removing the last stone. With a careful movement, he guided the animal's leg out of the trap. The horse freed itself seconds before the train passed roaring by, its cars creating a wall of iron and noise that made the earth tremble. When silence returned, broken only by the rain, Michael and the horse looked at each other. There was something in the animal's eyes that went beyond gratitude. It was recognition, connection, as if that rescue were the first link in a chain that would still be revealed. The farm stable hadn't received an occupant for months, but Michael worked urgently to prepare it. While the horse waited patiently in the rain, strangely refusing to move away even after being freed, Michael spread fresh hay, filled the trough with clean water, and adjusted the lighting to create a welcoming environment. "Come, boy," he called softly, extending his hand. The animal followed without resistance, as if it were a domesticated dog. This intrigued Michael, who expected more difficulty in leading a clearly traumatized horse. Once sheltered, he could finally observe it in more detail. Under the stable's artificial light, the marks on the animal's body became more visible and disturbing. They weren't just natural scars from accidents or fights. There were linear patterns on the legs, circular marks on the neck, and even signs suggesting prolonged restraints. Michael felt his stomach turn as he imagined what the animal had suffered. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, carefully running his hand over the marks. The horse didn't move away, but Michael noticed how it slightly trembled when touched in certain more sensitive areas. Dawn arrived with the rain gradually diminishing. Michael had spent the last few hours observing the animal, offering water and trying to understand its peculiar behavior. The horse ate only when Michael was present, refusing any food when left alone. Even stranger was its reaction to certain sounds. The kettle's whistle in the kitchen made it tremble, as did the noise of the metal gate creaking. At 7 in the morning, Michael called the only veterinarian in the region he knew by reference, Rachel Carter. According to the neighbors, she was competent and had a solid reputation both in treating animals and in more delicate issues involving mistreatment. "Hello, Dr. Rachel. This is Michael Reynolds from Vista Ridge Farm. I need your help urgently." "Good. Morning, Mr. Reynolds. What happened?" Michael hesitated, realizing how strange the story would sound. "I found an injured horse on the tracks during the storm last night. I managed to rescue it, but it shows concerning signs. Serious injuries. Not exactly recent injuries, but there are scars all over its body, and its behavior is very strange. It seems conditioned to fear." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'll be there in an hour. Don't try to medicate or bandage without professional guidance." While waiting, Michael prepared coffee and tried to process the previous night's events. The feeling that there was something deliberately planned in what happened wouldn't leave him. The stones between the rails were placed too precisely, and the presence of the horse in that specific location, exactly when a train was approaching, seemed more than coincidence. Rachel arrived punctually, driving a blue pickup with veterinary equipment in the bed. She was a woman of approximately 40, brown hair tied in a ponytail and a determined gaze. She wore practical clothes and carried a worn leather bag that indicated years of field experience. "Where's the patient?" she asked straightforwardly, greeting Michael with a firm handshake. "In the stable. I should warn you that he has a very particular behavior." Rachel stopped at the stable entrance and observed the animal for a few minutes before approaching. Michael noticed how she clenched her jaw as she observed the scars. "How much experience do you have with horses?" she asked, opening her bag. "2. Be honest, almost none. I bought this farm a few months ago and I'm still learning about rural life." "Then you were very lucky last night. This is no ordinary animal." Rachel slowly approached the horse, speaking in a low voice with controlled movements. "Hello, handsome, let's see how you're doing." The horse allowed the examination, but Michael noticed how it tensed its muscles with each touch. Rachel worked, methodically checking reflexes, examining the scars and making notes in a notebook. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to ask some direct questions," she said, after finishing the initial examination. "This horse was subjected to severe and systematic treatment. The marks indicate prolonged use of inadequate restraint equipment, possible exercise overload, and—" She paused. "Signs compatible with the use of chemical substances for behavior control." "Chemical substances?" "Heavy sedatives, probably administered regularly. What concerns me most is that someone disposed of him in a cruel manner. Horses with this lineage and I can affirm that this is an animal of noble lineage, are not abandoned by chance. Michael felt a chill. Are you suggesting that someone put him on the tracks intentionally? Rachel looked at him seriously. I'm suggesting that we need to discover where he came from, and quickly. This animal carries stories that someone preferred would die with him. The horse whinnied softly, as if understanding that it was finally in hands that cared about its well-being. Michael observed the animal's eyes and knew that his quiet life on the farm had ended. From that moment, he was committed to a journey that he couldn't yet fully comprehend. 2 days after the initial examination, Rachel returned to the farm with equipment that Michael couldn't immediately identify. It was a small electronic device similar to a barcode reader. I brought a microchip reader, she explained, noticing Michael's confused expression. It's standard procedure in cases like this. Horses of noble lineage are usually registered, and if there's suspicion of intentional abandonment, we need to investigate the origin. Michael watched as Rachel passed the device over the horse's neck and flank. After a few minutes, a sharp beep echoed through the stable. Found it, she announced, checking the display. Let's see what we discover. Rachel wrote down the sequence of numbers in her notebook and used her cell phone to access a veterinary database. Michael waited anxiously, stroking the muzzle of the horse that he had mentally named Valor, in honor of the courage shown during the rescue. Here it is, said Rachel, with an expression that mixed surprise and concern. Registered as Valley. Emperor born 7 years ago, owner, Horizon Ranch, Stephen Walsh. The name hit Michael like a punch to the stomach. He instinctively backed away from the horse, feeling his legs weaken. Mr. Reynolds, are you okay? Do you know that name? Michael needed to lean against the stable wall. Stephen Walsh wasn't just a name from the past. He was a ghost that had haunted his last years in the corporate world. I know him, he finally replied, his voice coming out hoarse. He was my partner about 8 years ago. Our partnership ended in a complicated way. Rachel closed her phone and looked at him with renewed attention. Complicated how? Michael took a deep breath, organizing memories he preferred to keep buried. Stephen and I were partners in a veterinary supplements company. At first, everything was going well, but I began to discover irregularities in the products, adulterations, falsified documents. When I confronted Stephen, he claimed they were normal market practices. And what happened? I gathered enough evidence to report him to the proper authorities, but when I presented the ultimatum, he managed to politically reverse the situation. He had connections I didn't know about, influence in strategic places. In the end, I was the one who left the partnership, with my reputation questioned and losing a fortune in investments. Rachel processed the information in silence. So you don't believe in coincidences? Definitely not. Michael looked at Valor, who was observing the conversation as if understanding every word. A horse registered in Stephen Walsh's name appears on the tracks that specifically cross my property on the only night of severe storm since I moved here. No, this was planned. But what would be the objective? Michael walked to the stable window, observing the mountain landscape that now seemed less welcoming. Stephen was always calculating. If he orchestrated this, it's because he wants something. Maybe to destabilize me. Maybe to force me to take some specific action. Or maybe eliminate evidence, Rachel calmly suggested. What do you mean? If this horse was subjected to irregular treatments, as the marks and exams suggest, he is living proof of illegal practices. Leaving him on the tracks would be a way to definitively get rid of incriminating evidence. The suggestion made Michael feel an anger he hadn't experienced in years. He looked at Valor and saw not just an injured animal, but a victim of a larger scheme that he couldn't yet fully comprehend. We need to know more about Horizon Ranch, he said with renewed determination. If Stephen is involved in illegal practices, other animals may be suffering. Rachel smiled for the first time since she arrived. Now you're speaking my language. I've always been suspicious of some operations in the region, but never had enough evidence to act. Then we have a partner now. Michael extended his hand. Partner and co-investigator. Rachel firmly shook his hand. But I need to warn you, if we're going to mess with Stephen Walsh, he won't remain passive. Are you prepared for the consequences? Michael looked again at Valor, who approached and rested his head on Michael's shoulder. That simple gesture of trust was more powerful than any motivation he had ever felt in the business world. For 40 years, I built a career avoiding direct conflicts, always choosing the safest path, he said, stroking the animal's neck. This time I'm going all the way. Valor deserves justice, and I have the feeling that there are many others like him waiting for someone who has the courage to stand up to Stephen. The horse whinnied softly, as if approving the decision. Michael knew he had crossed a line from which there would be no return. From that moment, his quiet retirement would give way to a battle that would test not only his determination, but his ability to face past mistakes that he had spent years trying to forget. The investigation began methodically. Rachel collected blood and hair samples from Valor for more detailed laboratory analyses, while Michael used his old corporate contacts to obtain information about Horizon Ranch's current activities. The first analyses have arrived, announced Rachel, arriving at the farm a week later with a brown envelope in her hands. The results are disturbing. Michael served coffee on the porch and waited anxiously as she organized the papers. We found traces of at least 3 different substances in Valor's system, she began, pointing to the graphs. Benzodiazepines in high doses, a veterinary, muscle relaxant that should only be used in surgeries, and something we couldn't completely identify. What does that mean in practice? It means this animal was systematically sedated for months, perhaps years. Additionally, there are indications of substances used to mask pain and inflammation, probably to keep him active even when he should have been resting. Michael felt his anger growing again. Doping. Exactly, and not amateur doping. We're talking about a sophisticated scheme, with access to controlled medications and specialized veterinary knowledge. At that moment, Michael's phone rang with an unknown number from Chicago. Michael Reynolds? Yes. This is Vivian Cooper. I worked with you at Vet Supply a few years ago. I need to speak with you urgently. Michael remembered Vivian, a competent and upright employee who had left the company shortly after his departure. Vivian, what a surprise. What can I do for you? Actually, it's the opposite. I heard through mutual contacts that you're investigating Stephen Walsh's activities. I have information that might interest you. Michael exchanged a significant look with Rachel. Go ahead. Not over the phone. Can I come to Pine Valley tomorrow? It's important. Of course. I'll send you the address. After hanging up, Michael explained the connection to Rachel. Vivian was responsible for quality control at our supplements company. If anyone knows the products Stephen currently markets, it's her. The next day, Vivian arrived driving a modest car, wearing simple clothes, but carrying a bulky folder. She was a woman in her 30s, with short blonde hair and a determined expression that Michael remembered well from his corporate days. Michael, you can't imagine the relief I felt when I heard that someone is finally seriously investigating. Stephen, she said, also greeting Rachel. What have you discovered? Vivian opened the folder and spread documents across the porch table. After I left Vet Supply, I set up a small quality control consultancy for smaller veterinary companies. Last year, I was approached by an anonymous employee from Horizon Ranch who wanted a second opinion on some products being used there. What kind of products? Seemingly normal supplements, but with altered compositions, labels indicating vitamins and minerals, but analyses revealing completely different substances. Vivian pointed to a report. This one was supposed to be a calcium supplement. In reality, it contains a potent cardiac stimulant. Rachel examined the documents with growing indignation. This explains a lot about Valor's condition. He was probably forced to compete under the effect of these substances. There's more, continued Vivian. I managed to track the origin of these falsified products. They come from a clandestine laboratory that operates as a front for a legitimate company. Stephen isn't just the buyer, he's a partner in the scheme. Michael studied the documents, recognizing patterns he had seen during the partnership. It's the same modus operandi from years ago. Stephen was always a specialist in creating layers of companies to mask illegal operations. "The problem is that he has now expanded significantly," warned Vivian. "We're not just talking about Horizon Ranch. There are at least 5 properties in the region involved in the scheme, and indications that similar products are being exported." Exported? To other South American countries, where oversight is even more precarious. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar business. Rachel stood up and walked to the stable, observing Valor through the window. "And the horses are discarded when they can no longer respond to the treatments, correct?" "Exactly. The employee who contacted me mentioned that several animals simply disappeared in the last 2 years. Officially, they were sold abroad or transferred to other properties." Michael felt the puzzle pieces fitting together. That's why Valor was placed on the tracks. He no longer served the scheme, but knew too much to be simply abandoned. Knew too much? "Think about it," explained Michael. "A horse with this history of irregular treatments would be living proof if it fell into the right hands. Veterinary examinations could trace the entire doping scheme." Vivian gravely agreed. "And there's something else you need to know. According to my source, Stephen discovered that Michael had moved to the region. The appearance of Valor on the tracks of your property wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate provocation." "A provocation with what purpose?" "To test you, to see if you still had the disposition to fight or if you had settled into retirement. Depending on your reaction, Stephen would make his next decisions." Michael looked at Valor, who was watching the conversation from the stable door. The animal seemed to understand that its fate was being decided at that table. "Then he got his answer," said Michael with determination. "Now it's his turn to discover what we're capable of when we decide to really fight." Stephen's reaction wasn't long in coming. 3 days after the meeting with Vivian, Michael woke to a crash that made the entire house shake. He ran to the window and saw that the farm's entrance gate had been torn from its hinges, apparently by a heavy vehicle that had fled during the night. "A very clear message," he muttered, quickly dressing to assess the damage. In the stable, Valor showed signs of agitation, nervously pacing and softly whinnying. Michael noticed that the animal had developed a special sensitivity for dangerous situations, as if his instincts had been sharpened by past trauma. The phone rang while Michael was examining the remains of the gate. "I heard about the incident," Rachel said without preamble. "Vivian called me worried. She said this type of intimidation is standard when Stephen feels threatened." "It came sooner than expected," replied Michael, observing the tire marks in the dirt. "But it only confirms we're on the right track. There's news. A writer contacted me yesterday after I discreetly commented about our case with some colleagues. She said she recognizes Valor from old competitions." Michael felt his heart race. She could bring important information. "Amanda Turner. She'll be at your place in 2 hours." While waiting, Michael tried to temporarily repair the gate and reflected on the next steps. Stephen's provocation had escalated to physical intimidation, which meant the investigation was bothering him. This was simultaneously encouraging and concerning. Amanda arrived punctually, driving a small trailer. She was a tall woman, approximately 35 years old, with the elegant bearing typical of someone who grew up in the equestrian world. She wore riding boots and carried a leather portfolio that suggested professional organization. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Amanda Turner. Rachel told me about Valor." "Please, call me Michael. Would you like to meet him first?" Amanda walked to the stable and stopped abruptly upon seeing the horse. Her expression changed from professional curiosity to genuine shock. "My God. It really is him," she whispered, slowly approaching. "Valley Emperor. I saw him compete several times about 3 years ago." Valor raised his head and observed Amanda with interest as if he recognized her too. "You knew him?" "Knew and admired him. He was a legend in the jumping competitions in the Midwest. Impeccable technique, exceptional courage, magnificent lineage." Amanda carefully extended her hand, and Valor allowed the caress, until he suddenly disappeared. From the circuit, Michael invited Amanda to the porch where they served coffee while she organized her documents. I brought everything I could gather about Valley Emperor, she said, spreading photographs and certificates across the table. Awards, rankings, genealogy. He comes from an exceptional lineage. Michael examined the photos, impressed by the animal's transformation. In the images, Valor appeared radiant, muscular, with a shiny coat and confident gaze. The contrast with the traumatized animal he had rescued was moving. What happened to take him out of circulation? Officially, he was sold to a breeder in the countryside, but we always suspected something was wrong. In the last competition he participated in, his behavior was strange, very agitated, almost aggressive, completely different from his usual personality. Signs of doping? Probably. And more. I discovered that several horses from Horizon Ranch began to show similar patterns around the same time. Exceptional performances followed by erratic behavior and then sudden disappearance. Amanda showed a detailed spreadsheet. I did a survey of the last 5 years. At least 12 high-lineage horses followed this pattern, all officially sold or transferred, but never seen in competitions again. 12. Horses, repeated Michael, feeling the dimension of the scheme. And there's more. I talked with other competitors who began to suspect Horizon Ranch's frequent victories, always with different horses, always with performances that seemed artificial. Tame, that moment, Rachel arrived with a grave expression. We have problems, she announced without preamble. I received a call from the laboratory. Someone tried to bribe the technician responsible for Valor's blood analyses. They offered a significant amount to alter the results. And did he accept? No, but he was frightened. He said he had never received such a direct proposal to falsify exams. Michael stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, observing the distant mountains. Stephen is desperate. First the physical intimidation, now an attempt at bribery. This means our evidence is more solid than we imagined. But it also means he won't stop here, warned Amanda. I know Stephen Walsh's reputation in the circuit. He doesn't hesitate to destroy careers when he feels threatened. Then we need to act before he takes more drastic measures, concluded Michael. Amanda, would you be willing to help us officially? Your knowledge of the competition world is essential. I'm in. I've always wanted to see Stephen pay for what he did to these animals. I just didn't know how to act alone. Rachel smiled. So now we're 4. Michael, Vivian, Amanda and me, a respectable team against a powerful adversary. Michael looked at Valor, who was watching the conversation from the stable door. The animal seemed to understand that his story was being told and that for the first time in years, he had people genuinely willing to fight for justice. Stephen underestimated one important thing, said Michael with renewed determination. He messed with the wrong horse on the wrong farm with the wrong man. Now he'll discover that provoking an adversary, who has nothing more to lose, can be a fatal mistake. The war was declared, and Michael knew there would be no turning back. The discovery came through Amanda, who had spent the night investigating Valor's genealogy in official equine records. The next morning, she appeared at the farm with an expression that mixed excitement and perplexity. Michael, you need to see this immediately, she said, spreading genealogical documents across the table. Valor's lineage is more special than we imagined. Michael approached, observing the complex ancestry diagrams that Amanda had prepared. Valley Emperor is directly descended from a lineage called Reynolds Dynasty, explained Amanda, pointing to the highlighted names. Horses bred by a small breeder who operated in the region between the 1980s and 2000. Reynolds is a common surname, observed Michael, but feeling an inexplicable chill. Yes, but there are specific details. The breeder was named Robert Reynolds. He had a small property in Highland County and was known for breeding horses with exceptional temperament and pure lineage. Until... Amanda hesitated, observing Michael's reaction. Until what? Until... He lost everything in a series of financial accidents in the late 1990s. Loans suddenly called in, suppliers cancelling contracts, buyers backing out of closed deals. In 2 years he went bankrupt and disappeared from the region. Michael felt the world spinning around him. Robert Reynolds, the name his mother had mentioned few times throughout her life, always with a sadness that he had never been able to fully understand. Amanda. Do you have more information about this Robert Reynolds? I do. Why? Do you know the family? Michael sat down heavily, his legs weakening. Robert Reynolds was my father. The silence that followed was broken only by Valor's soft whinny, as if the animal sensed the importance of that moment. Your father? Amanda repeated, incredulous. My mother always said he had left when I was very young, that he didn't want responsibilities. I grew up believing he had abandoned us by choice. Michael ran his hands over his face, trying to process the information. I never knew he bred horses. Amanda continued consulting her documents. Michael, there's more. According to the records, the Reynolds dynasty produced some of the best jumping horses in the region. Robert was respected for his ethics and the exceptional care he took with the animals. And what really happened to him? The records are vague, but there are indications that he was investigating irregularities in the local equestrian circuit, suspicions of doping, result manipulation, corruption of judges. Shortly before the bankruptcy, he had reported several properties for illegal practices. Michael felt the pieces fitting together with frightening clarity. And who was behind? Are these practices? Amanda consulted a separate folder. Here it is, among the people cited in the last documents that Robert presented to the authorities. There's a name you recognize, Stephen Walsh. The revelation hit Michael like lightning. He abruptly stood up and walked to the stable, where Valor was waiting for him as always. The animal approached and rested his head on Michael's shoulder, a gesture that now gained a completely new meaning. You're the last one, murmured Michael, stroking the horse's neck. The last of the lineage my father bred. That's why Stephen brought you here. It wasn't just a provocation. It was a revenge planned for more than 20 years. Amanda approached carefully. Michael, there's something else you need to know. I managed to locate a person who worked with your father, Mary Johnson, who was Robert's veterinarian in the last years before the bankruptcy. Is she still alive? Yes, and she lives here in Pine Valley. I spoke with her on the phone yesterday. She said she always hoped someone from the Reynolds family would one day discover the truth. Michael felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at having grown up without knowing the truth about his father. Sadness for the lost opportunities, but also a determination he had never felt before. I want to talk to her, he said firmly. She can receive you this afternoon. That afternoon, Michael drove through the familiar streets of Pine Valley with a nervousness he hadn't felt since adolescence. Mary Johnson lived in a simple house in the center of town, with a small, well-kept garden that indicated a life of simplicity and order. She was a lady of approximately 70 years, grey hair tied in a bun, and eyes that brightened with emotion upon seeing Michael. My God, she said, covering her mouth with her hands, you look just like Robert when he was young. They sat in the modest living room, with walls decorated by old photographs of horses and people Michael didn't recognize. Your mother never told you the truth, did she? Asked Mary gently. No. She always said he had abandoned us. Robert would never abandon you by choice, Mary said with conviction. He talked about you constantly, showed photos, planned to take you to meet the horses when you were older. So what happened? Mary sighed deeply. Your father discovered a doping and manipulation scheme that involved some of the most influential properties in the region. When he began to investigate and threatened to report them, the pressures began, first subtle, then direct. What kind of pressures? Threats to the family. They said if he didn't stop investigating, something could happen to you and your mother. Robert was desperate. Michael felt his chest tighten, so he distanced himself to protect us. Exactly. He agreed to leave the region, abandon the horses and never return in exchange for his family's safety. But they didn't keep the agreement. Even after he left, they destroyed his financial reputation to ensure he could never bother them again. Michael looked at a photograph on the wall that showed a young man next to a magnificent horse. The face was like looking in a mirror. And Valor. He's the last direct descendant of the horses your father bred with so much love. When he heard that Stephen had acquired animals from the old Reynolds dynasty, Robert tried to return to prevent it, but it was too late. He passed away 5 years ago, always carrying the weight of not having been able to protect his horses. Michael closed his eyes, feeling tears he hadn't shed in decades. Valor wasn't just a rescued animal. He was his heritage, the last connection to a father who had sacrificed everything to protect him. Now he understood why Stephen had orchestrated that rescue. It was the closing of a circle of revenge that began 20 years earlier. But Stephen had made a fatal mistake. He had given Michael the motivation he needed to fight to the end. The revelation about his father transformed Michael from a cautious investigator into a determined warrior. In the following days, his farm became an operations center, where evidence was organized, strategies planned, and a support network silently grew. Vivian had brought more documents obtained through her source at Horizon Ranch, including financial records that showed the international extent of the scheme. Rachel coordinated veterinary examinations on other suspicious animals in the region. Amanda used her contacts in the equestrian world to identify more victims and witnesses willing to speak. "We need something definitive," said Michael during a meeting on the porch. "We have enough evidence to raise suspicions, but we need irrefutable proof to ensure that Stephen doesn't escape again." "I have an idea," announced Vivian hesitantly. "My source at Horizon Ranch said there's an important competition next week. Stephen will present 3 new horses, supposedly recently acquired from abroad. And if we can collect samples from these horses during the competition, we can prove the doping in real time. It would be incontestable evidence." Rachel shook her head. "It's too risky. How are we going to get access to the animals during an official competition?" "I can help," offered Amanda. "I still have valid credentials as a rider. I can register for the competition and have access to the restricted areas." Michael considered the proposal. It was dangerous, but it could be the opportunity they needed. "There's another problem," continued Vivian. "My source said that Stephen is planning something bigger. Apparently, he discovered our investigations and is accelerating his plans. There are rumors that he intends to get rid of more horses before they're discovered." "What do you mean by get rid of?" "The same thing they tried to do with Valor, accidents that eliminate inconvenient evidence." Michael felt a renewed urgency. They weren't just investigators seeking justice. They were in a race against time to save innocent lives. That night, while checking on Valor in the stable, Michael found a surprise. An elderly man was waiting for him, nervously holding his hat. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Joseph Wilson. I worked at Horizon Ranch." Michael was immediately alert. "How did you get here?" "On foot through the back of the property. I couldn't be seen arriving by the main road." Joseph looked around nervously. "I came because I heard you're investigating the bad things that happened there." "What bad things?" Joseph approached Valor, who immediately showed signs of recognition and affection. "This one I knew well. He was one of the favorites before he got sick." "Sick how?" "The injections, sir, every day, different medicines. Some horses went crazy, others became too slow. Emperor here was one who resisted for a long time, but in the end, he couldn't take it anymore." Michael invited Joseph to the kitchen, where they had coffee while the man told his story. "I've worked with horses for 40 years, sir. I've never seen anything like what happens at Horizon Ranch. Beautiful horses arrive there, and within a few months, they're unrecognizable. Why didn't you report this before?" Joseph lowered his eyes. "I have a family, sir. Stephen made it very clear what happens to those who talk too much. But now he's planning something that I can't accept." "What?" "He's going to burn down the stable where the sick horses are kept. Say it was an electrical accident. There are 8 horses there, sir, 8 animals that can barely stand upright." Michael felt his blood freeze. "When?" "After next week's competition. He said he wants to clean up the area before the inspection. He's expecting." Michael realized they had underestimated Stephen's cruelty. It wasn't just doping. It was systematic elimination of evidence through terrible means. "Joseph, would you be willing to help us save these horses?" The elderly man looked at Valor, who had approached the kitchen window as if listening to the conversation. "For them, yes. I can't let this happen." In the following days, Michael's farm transformed into a military operations base. Joseph brought detailed plans of Horizon Ranch, including escape routes and security schedules. Amanda registered for the competition and began training to disguise her true mission. Rachel organized an improvised veterinary hospital to receive the rescued horses. "We're going to need more space," observed Michael, watching the preparations. 8 debilitated horses will need intensive care. "I've already thought about that," replied Rachel. "I talked with 3 neighboring farms whose owners have always been suspicious of Stephen's activities. They offered help." Michael smiled for the first time in days. "So we're not alone." Far from it. The news has spread discreetly through the region. There are more people willing to help than we imagined. On the eve of the operation, Michael walked to the stable where Valor waited for him as he did every night. The animal had recovered physically, but Michael perceived that he still carried deep emotional trauma. "Tomorrow we're going to get your friends," he said, stroking the horse's neck. "And we're going to make sure Stephen pays for everything he did to you, to them, and to my father." Valor whinnied softly, pressing his head against Michael's chest. It was a gesture of absolute trust, as if the animal understood that he had finally found someone who would fight for him to the end. Michael looked around his property, which had transformed from a quiet refuge into a center of resistance. From the next day on, nothing would be the same. They were going to confront Stephen on his own territory, armed with truth, courage, and the determination to ensure that justice would finally prevail. The war that began with a horse trapped on the tracks was about to reach its climax. The day of the competition dawned cloudy, with a low fog covering the mountains like an omen. Michael woke before dawn, checked on Valor in the stable, and found the animal restless, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. "Today's the day," he murmured, offering an apple that Valor carefully accepted. "We're going to get your companions." At 8 in the morning, the team gathered at the farm for the final review of the plan. Amanda would leave for the competition as a participating rider, carrying sample collection equipment hidden in her luggage. Joseph knew the exact routine of the employees and would guard the sick horses until the rescue moment. Rachel would coordinate the emergency medical operation. Michael would lead the actual rescue with support from 3 neighboring farmers. "Remember," said Michael, looking at each team member, "we're not just saving horses, we're ending a cycle of injustice that began 20 years ago with my father." Amanda left first, driving her trailer toward Horizon Ranch. An hour later, Joseph left on foot through the back of the property. Michael and the others waited until noon, when the competition would be at its peak, and Stephen's attention completely focused on the main events. Horizon Ranch was an imposing property with professional tracks, grandstands, and stables that looked more like luxury hotels than rural facilities. But Michael knew that behind the elegant facade hid a cruel and systematic operation of abuse. Joseph met them at the back entrance, as agreed. "The horses are in stable 3, away from the competition. There's only one guard, who always takes a nap after lunch." Amanda had managed to collect samples from 2 of Stephen's 3 horses during preparation for the trials. The syringes were hidden in her equipment, awaiting later analysis. More importantly, she had confirmed that Stephen was completely involved in the competition, personally supervising each event. "We have a 2-hour window," Joseph informed via radio. After that, the employees returned to their normal routine. Michael and his team approached Stable 3 with racing hearts. When they opened the doors, the scene that awaited them was devastating. 8 horses in deplorable conditions occupied the stalls. Some could barely stand, others showed evident signs of malnutrition and abandonment, but all still maintained, in their eyes, the spark of life that had once characterized them. "My God," murmured one of the farmers, "how can anyone do this?" Michael approached each animal, whispering words of encouragement. "Easy, boys, we've come to get you." The rescue was a delicate and emotional operation. Each horse needed to be individually led to the rescue trailers with special care due to their debilitated state. Michael recognized in each of them the same marks he had found on Valor: scars from restraints, signs of repeated injections, the traumatized look of those who had suffered systematic abuse. When they were loading the last horse, Joseph ran toward the group with a panicked expression. Stephen found out. Someone must have told him. He's coming here with 2 security guards. Michael felt the adrenaline surge. How much time do we have? 2 minutes at most. Finish loading, ordered Michael. I'll talk to him. Michael, no, protested Rachel. It's too dangerous. That's exactly why I need to do this. It's time to settle accounts. Michael walked toward the main entrance of the stable, where he found Stephen Walsh accompanied by 2 burly men. 20 years had passed since their last encounter, but the mutual hatred remained intact. Michael Reynolds, said Stephen with a cruel smile, you should have stayed in Chicago playing retiree. I should have, but someone placed a very special gift on the tracks of my farm. Ah, yes, Valley Emperor, or as you now call him, Valor, Stephen laughed. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist a horse from your dear daddy's lineage. You destroyed his life, and now you're making innocent horses pay for your cowardice. Your father was a naive man who didn't understand how business works, just like you. The difference is that this time I won't be content with just driving you away from the region. The security guards approached, but at that moment, the trailers began to leave the stable carrying the rescued horses. Stephen realized what was happening and shouted orders to stop the vehicles from leaving. Too late, said Michael with satisfaction. The horses are already safe, and we have enough evidence to prove everything you've done here. Evidence that will never reach the authorities, threatened Stephen. It already has, announced Amanda, approaching with a recorder in her hand. This entire conversation has been transmitted live to the regional police station. Oh, and the samples from your champion horses, all contaminated with illegal substances. Stephen's expression changed from confidence to despair. Michael realized he had finally turned the tables. It's over, Stephen. 20 years later, the truth has finally come to light. In the months that followed, the scandal dominated regional headlines. Stephen was arrested for animal cruelty, doping, document forgery, and a series of other crimes that the investigations revealed. Horizon Ranch was closed, and its assets auctioned to pay indemnities. Michael's farm transformed into Valor Sanctuary, a refuge for horses victims of mistreatment, and a center for education on animal welfare. The 8 rescued horses recovered slowly, each finding their own way to overcome the traumas they had experienced. Valor, now the informal leader of the herd, had recovered not only his physical health, but also his confidence and joy of living. Michael often found him playing with the other horses, as if he had finally found the family he had always sought. Mary Johnson, the veterinarian who had known Robert Reynolds, visited the sanctuary regularly. During one of these visits, she brought a special surprise for Michael. I found this among the old papers, she said, handing him a handwritten letter. Your father wrote it to you shortly before leaving. He never had the courage to send it. Michael opened the letter with trembling hands and read the words he had waited a lifetime to hear. My dear son, if you are reading this letter someday, it means the truth has finally come to light. Know that leaving was the hardest decision of my life, but it was the only way to protect you and your mother. I hope someday you can forgive my choices. If you ever find descendants of our horses, take care of them with the love that I couldn't give to you personally. They carry our history and our legacy. With all my love, Robert. Michael looked at Valor, who was peacefully grazing in the afternoon sun, surrounded by his rescued companions. The horse raised his head and observed him with those intelligent eyes that now sparkled with joy instead of trauma. He is taking care, Dad, murmured Michael. And now they're home. The sound of hooves approaching announced the arrival of Rachel, Amanda, and Vivian for the sanctuary's weekly meeting. Together, they had transformed an isolated act of rescue into a regional movement for animal protection that grew each day. Michael smiled, watching his friends approach and the horses running free in the pastures. The storm that had brought Valor into his life had also brought purpose, friendship, and a way to honor his father's memory. Sometimes, thought Michael, the best destinies are those we never plan, but that find us exactly when we need them most.